Afternoon. Um, I started. Reciting. I actually recited most of a chapter of my novel the other day, on Wednesday. I'm still going to finish that one off. There's just a little bit left. But for today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about when we moved to Ireland the first time, all the way back in 1972, when I was just a wee lad. So all I remember about the preparations for our trip to Ireland is watching a show where there was a chap, he was wearing a tweed cap, and he sang a song about Molly Malone. In Dublin fair city, where the girls are so pretty, there once was a maiden named Molly Malone, and she wheeled her wheelbarrow through the streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, calling cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. She was a fishmonger, and sure 'twas no wonder, for her father and mother were fishmongers too, and they wheeled their wheelbarrows through the streets broad and narrow, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, crying cockles and mussels, alive, alive, oh. Now, my chief memory about arriving in Ireland is palm trees. I was not expecting that. And you see, we didn't live in Los Angeles. We didn't live in Southern California. We lived in upstate New York, and the city where we lived regularly received the Golden Snowball Award for the most snow. And there was a lot more snow in those days too, before global warming started really taking off. Not that I believe in global warming, in case any NSA people are listening to this and don't approve of that sort of thing. So we stayed the first few days at Miss Murray's guest house, a Georgian building very close to St. Stephen's Green, where we'd go to play on a roundabout. And we also had our dinners at St. Stephen's Green. And they consisted mostly at that point of sandwiches. Well, so far as I can recall, entirely of sandwiches. The setting was lovely, but the food left something to be desired. Now, for the Americans, the Georgian style is what you call federal. But I had never heard of federal at that point. Then one day we walked and walked and walked and walked and walked until we arrived at Granite Hall in Dún Laoghaire. Now, I'm sure we didn't actually walk all the way from St. Stephen's Green to Dún Laoghaire, but that's kind of how I'm remembering it. We must have, I don't know, did we take a bus? Did we take a cab? I don't know, but we did walk a lot. And we had our luggage with us too. And I guess my parents or my mother at this point would know better than I why we didn't just take a cab all the way there. I have no idea. So, what I noticed first about the neighborhood, apart from the palm trees, were the stone walls and iron fences and gates that separated the various houses. Like, we didn't have that in our neighborhood of Syracuse. We might have a wire fence, but often there was like no dividing, nothing dividing the yards at all. The second thing I remember noticing is the sea. A short walk would take you to People's Park, which was surrounded by a green iron fence and boasted a wonderful slide. Next to the slide was a pile of rubble, which I liked to pretend was an archaeological dig. In the middle of the park, there was a kind of an elevation of some kind with like a stairway, and you could climb up, and I think there was some kind of small building, like a gazebo or something. Perhaps the best thing about the park was that when you crossed it, it took you almost directly to the beach. And it wasn't a sandy beach. At least that wasn't its attraction. Thank heavens. The attraction was the rocks. Climbing on stuff was one of my principal pastimes in those days, and there was plenty of opportunity for that. Although you had to be careful with the seaweed because it was slippery. An added interest was looking at the tidal pools with their sea anemones and starfish and like brittle stars, barnacles, mussels. And there was also a Martello Tower, and I later heard that was the one that James Joyce lived in. So now we get to the culture shock, which later on the shoe was on the other foot. When I got back from Ireland, the third time when it came back to the US, but we're going back before that time. We're going back to like when I was a young kid, and the culture shock was the other way. I did make friends in Ireland, but so lots of things were very weird, and people also probably thought I was weird. And at one point, I got into a big shrieking fight with somebody from Scotland who initially was my friend. We were friends, and he invited me over to tea, but then later we had a vicious quarrel over the pronunciation of the word tomato. Tomato, 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 tomato. It was very stupid. I also couldn't get past garage for a garage. And now, of course, shoe being on the other foot, and I squirm when I hear Americans say en route instead of en route. And I'm not even making that up. Ew, that's just disgusting. Just stop that, people. Just stop it. Okay, now for a while, people did used to yell out to me, bleepity bleep, my real name. Bleepity bleep, rob the bank. Only they use my real name, but I'm keeping that a secret for the moment. I didn't realize that at the time, but I suspect this is because Americans are gangsters. And then later on, someone who I innocently thought was defending me said, he didn't rob the bank, he's the banker. But now I suspect that what this really meant was that everyone in the US is a rich capitalist. And here's another charming exchange. Me. Where are you going? Them. We're going to the bathroom, as you call it. Me. What do you call it? Them. The toilet. Me. Oh. I should have remembered that. But of course it depends. For example, the word I don't think I ever found the word biscuit for cookie that weird, because I wasn't really familiar with the biscuits in the American sense anyway. Later, once I settled in better, I went to and I gave parties, visited people, went to the cinema, etc. Even if I remained horribly yank in some of my attitudes. I remember a fairly successful birthday party in particular where I got a magic trip and a map of wonders of the world. Oh, and there was a tunnel too. I got this tunnel thing that you could crawl through. And then when I got back there in 1975, I had a Halloween party to recover some of the magic. More weird culture stuff. In Ireland, they had a thick, vaguely orange-like, somewhat tang-ish juice thing called Mi Wadi. The slogan was, "Honestly, Mom, Mi Wadi's strong stuff." And I believe that still exists. And they ate beefsteak and kidney pies, but the worst of it was that I liked them. Of course, I didn't know what kidneys were at that point. Then there's the British comics, the Beano, Core, Sparky, etc. They're very weird to anyone who was brought up on Harvey comics. Do Harvey comics even still exist? I suppose they must, in some form. In Dublin, they mostly had British comics. I don't remember any specifically Irish comics. And some decades later, I told some English friends that I was horrified at the British Dennis the Menace, and one of them replied that he had been horrified at the American one. Mr. Wilson, indeed. He was, of course, quite right. But we did discover a couple of continental comic book series in Ireland that were more congenial. Tintin and Asterix. I think the Asterix came earlier. It features a village of Gauls holding out against the Romans with the aid of a magic potion that gives them superhuman strength, and entails a lot of cartoon violence and bad puns. But it was pretty funny. And educational too. That's where I started learning Latin, sort of. I came to Ireland knowing hardly any history at all, and was now introduced to the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra's nose, etc. I think it was also because of Asterix that I tried, with the aid of a dictionary, to write a couple of comic strips in Latin. I wasn't terribly successful since I knew nothing about the grammar. So we would have Latin words with English morphology and syntax, but I got a little bit better at it later. And sometimes I got lost, like trying to look up the word for as and ending up using a word that I later found out referred to the Roman coin, the os, which is where we get the word ace from, I believe. So Tintin might be a little better known than Asterix in the US, but I had never heard of it. The first book I remember reading was The Crab with the Golden Claws, where I was in hysterics over Tintin's nightmare where he turns into a bottle and Captain Haddock, wearing a crazed expression, starts applying a corkscrew to him. You probably had to be there. So, another thing that was weird was being called master. They would call you master this and master that. Now, in those days, we still learned in school Mr., Mrs., and Miss. We didn't learn about Ms. in school in those days. Now, on top of that, in Ireland, you had Master if you were like a young chap. Now, it's possible that they were just abasing themselves before my greatness, but I kind of doubt it. Now, a major part of the culture shock was probably going to school, but if pressed, even at my most, quote, patriotic, end quote, I would have had to concede that I liked the school there vastly better than school in the US. So, one of the first things I was made aware of when going to school was the need for uniforms. We had to wear a dress shirt, gray trousers. We were meant to wear shorts, but I got too cold and successfully got permission to wear trousers instead and a gray sweater. I don't recall whether we had to wear a tie at this stage. I definitely had to wear one later. This may be the place to inform the foreigner that there is a distinction between Catholic schools and Protestant schools. Ours was a Protestant school, rather, quote, West Brit, end quote, by which the Irish meant Anglophile, although we did learn specifically Irish subjects as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't any Catholic pupils, and I knew nothing about all that at the time, since my knowledge of Irish history upon arrival must have been fairly close to nil. Our teacher was Mrs. Healy, an imposing woman with an impressive voice and dark red, I guess one would say auburn, hair. She had a very formal manner, but I always found it odd that she would call me young man. But she was kind, and I think she's like the first teacher I remember being fond of at all. And I don't think I got into trouble. I did get sent to the principal once or twice, but I think it was for just administrative stuff. And there I read some appalling cautionary tales about getting gored by bulls. About girls getting gored by bulls because they couldn't read. Now, later on, I learned these were probably satire. But I didn't know it at the time. Mrs. Healy was, however, quite insistent on improving my handwriting, at which she was quite right, because my handwriting was absolutely abominable. So I had to write out poems and join letters. Things like, she failed to heed these simple rules and few. The snake is living yet. Most of these poems were over my head. One began, and here we have the Nordic man, and be as like him as you can. The last verse began something like, the lowest race of all, Mediterranean we call. Knowing some context, I'm fairly sure that Belloc meant it as a satire, but at the time I took it deeply seriously, and I commented in my normal bad handwriting that the poem was dirty and racist. R-A-S-S-I-S-T. So, classes. Meanwhile, I was enjoying our scripture classes, I suppose that was because it was an historically Protestant school. I liked Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors, and I was very keen on the story of Moses and the bulrushes and how he killed the Egyptian, the burning bush, the plagues, and all that. It's a very good story. I don't know what Mrs. Healy made of my drawing the characters to look like Pogo, possum, but I didn't get reprimanded for it. We put on a play called The Dribblesome Teapot about a royal court where a teapot kept dribbling. Apart from arousing my interest in the different types of servants and teaching the word adapted, the play also offered me an opportunity to shine as a magician, complete with a hat. And one of my enthusiasms in those days was magic shows. And I later got a magic set for my birthday. I don't remember any of my real lines, but I do remember ad-libbing and turning to the audience to tell them, "I will turn you all into frogs." I also remember a field trip to Newgrange. This was before the days when it had been, quote, restored, end quote. What is it about Ireland and historic monuments anyway? They turned Newgrange into a theme park, a Viking archaeological dig into a car park? Surely the thing to do was to put the hypothetical original appearance in a model or a picture in a museum and not to alter the actual site? Anyway, apart from having lunch on the hillside, my principal memory is being afraid because it was dark and it was underground and we might run into something dead. Some other academic factoids before I get to the meat. Languages, literature, and history. I took, or tried to take, piano lessons. I kept getting distracted and to this day can barely read music. But I tried, sometimes. My parents took me to the Monkstown Meeting House, Quaker Meeting House, where we went upstairs and practiced the songs that the teacher, Mr. Kunst, a very patient chap, had sent me as homework. I was quite pleased when I managed the Ice Cream Mountain, but by and large, I fear I wasn't a success. I don't remember if it was Mr. Kunst or Mrs. Healy, or I think it was someone else, actually, a different teacher. Was it Mrs. Maidman? I don't know. Anyway, a series of songs about a couple of South American children who had to travel to another village, I think to meet their parents. On the way, they met a benevolent stranger who sang a song warning them against El Tigre. Of course, they made it through in the end. I vaguely recall the first line being somewhere in Peru. Doop-a-doop-a-doop-doop. I also had a xylophone with songs written in keys, in an easy notation, so I'd know which keys to hit. I think it was color-coded. I also liked nature class. We learned about hedgehogs and heard a woman on a tape regretting that she accidentally ran over one. Also, we heard about starfish and mussels, which tied into the tidal pools near our house. The class I used to think was taught by Mrs. Maidman, but the headmistress, but I think she taught something else instead. I think it was Mrs. Weatherall who taught nature. So Mrs. Maidman was the headmistress. We all had to stand up when she entered the room. And I think that was still the case in U Park. We still had to stand up when the headmaster came in. Wait, no, my report for nature is signed PMP. Maybe it was Mrs. Pearson who taught nature. Anyway, we also learned weird things about words like centipede, baker's dozen, murmuration of starlings, etc. Maybe that was Mrs. Maidman. Of mathematics, I chiefly remember building pyramids out of Cuisinart rods, which was only indirectly relevant to the subject. Geography was taught by the Irish language teacher, and I recall learning about French wines and the Tour de France, as well as the old chestnut about the word kangaroo arising because the colonists asked the Aboriginals what the animal was, and the Aborigines supposedly replied, kangaroo, meaning I don't know. I think I wondered even then how plausible that was. Now, I loathed games and was absolute rubbish at them. When I say games, for the American, games means sports. We had to play hockey. And I always hated doing team sports at school. I would run away to play actual games, what I thought of as games about Willie the Stick, instead of playing field hockey, which I found a crashing bore. And this is a good place to stop. We'll carry on with this on another occasion later. So, what are you doing that for, you stupid computer? Sorry. Ow. Go jump in a lake. That's idiotic. Anyway, have a riot.